Hello, I'm Rick Harp, host of APTN News Brief, a daily podcast version of the nightly broadcast of APTN National News. Available on all major podcast platforms, APTN News Brief is your quick way to hear the headlines every weekday morning. Learn more at aptnnews.ca/podcasts.
Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is longtime lawyer Julian Falconer. Falconer is a well-known figure in the Canadian legal community and recognized as one of the country's top human rights lawyers. He was part of Canadian legal history when he acted on behalf of Mayor Arar. Falconer also played a key role in the Ipperwash inquiry into the death of Dudley George and has worked on the inquest into the deaths of 7 youth in Thunder Bay and on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Falconer also represented the family of Stacey DeBungy and is now representing the families of 3 First Nations people who recently died in Thunder Bay, who are calling for the police service to be disbanded and new investigations into the deaths of their loved ones. Julian, thanks so much for being with us here on the show this week.
Pleasure, Nance.
As we mentioned, there are a long list of high-profile cases you've worked on. We named just a few of them even, and hopefully we're going to get to some of those, but do want to start with Thunder Bay. You've done a lot of work in the Northern Ontario city, even opened an office there a few years back. I guess what initially drew you to working in the region?
Well, we'll have to agree that a few years back now means something in the neighborhood of 16 years. Oh. I opened an office in Thunder Bay in 2008, right. And I saw it and continue to see it as sadly as ground zero for human rights violations in respect of Indigenous people and the police.
Earlier this week, dozens of First Nations leaders, family members, yourself, all gathered in Toronto to reissue a call to have the Thunder Bay Police Service disbanded and the deaths of their loved ones reinvestigated. You're representing 2 of those families. Can you tell us a bit about those cases?
Sure. So I act for the family of Corey Bileski and the family of Jenna Osberg. Corey's death happened in November 2022, and Jenna's death happened in late December of 2023. The problems, the family of Mackenzie Munoz from Niskendaga were also at the press conference, and we've been doing advocacy for them. But the bottom line is, Anishinaabe Nation and those families came to the south, came to Toronto, came to the legislature to repeat the calls for the disbandment of the Thunder Bay Police, to plead for help for these families to get credible investigations. I mean, they have run out of options. Oddly enough, the Thunder Bay Police have remained in place in circumstances were dating back to 2018, so 6 years ago. They had the dubious honor of being the first police service ever declared across the service as a racist police service, and that's what the Broken Trust Report did in 2018 from OIPRD. So when you look at the passage of time of the last 6 years, it's done nothing but get worse. The chief of police at that time was J.P. Levesque. He faced criminal charges. He was ultimately acquitted, but he faced criminal charges. The chief of police next is Sylvie Hoth. Same story. She faces criminal charges. The chief lawyer for the Thunder Bay Police Service now faces criminal charges in respect of obstruct. I mean, the tales of basically decline in respect of that service continue. Indigenous people cannot trust that police service. Indigenous people, when they lose a loved one, shouldn't be re-traumatized by the reality that they can't get help. But that's what's going on in Thunder Bay. They can't get help. 2 hallmarks, 2 things about a credible death investigation are basic 101 for investigations. Firstly, it has to be a timely investigation, and you know that. You know, they talk about the first 24 hours, etc. It's intended to be timely. Secondly, no investigation agency can operate credibly and well unless they have community trust. Both those things are sadly lacking for the Thunder Bay Police Service, and instead of confronting the issue, Ontario has chosen to basically put lipstick on a pig. It keeps putting in these administrators. In each case, these administrators, no experience in policing, no credibility and no presence with Indigenous people. That's been their answer, and it's been an utter failure.
Calling for the disbandment of the Thunder Bay Police Service, not a new thing. What is forwarding of those complaints to the Inspector General of Policing in Ontario, who told APTN News that they have the authority to disband a police service, but only as a measure of last resort. Are there other measures here that haven't been tried? Have we reached the last resort, do you think?
Well, in a PowerPoint presentation that we did at the press conference, and I don't know how well your camera can see this, but we had a visual of a car pileup, right? And that's the story of death investigations in Thunder Bay. I don't know whether people know the truth about what's going on. Starting from the 7 youth inquest that I had the honor of representing Anishinaabe Nation at, countless numbers of deaths have been identified as having been incompetently investigated and are now being reinvestigated. And these deaths of Indigenous people keep piling up. In 34 years in the business, this is new to me. I have never encountered this notion of cold case after cold case after cold case. I represent the family of Stacey DeBungy. I represent Brad DeBungy and his sisters. Do you know that that death happened, Stacey's death happened in 2015, and they're still investigating? Why? Because if the first agency on the job bungles it, when they try to put Humpty back together again, these investigations invariably are impossible to solve in a timely way. So what's happened is 20 to 30 Indigenous deaths now are all lined up in a form of car pileup. And now these families, the Munoz family, the Bolesky family, the Osberg family, they're all facing the same truth that their loved one is about to be caught up in this cold case factory. And so we are at a stage now where the Ontario government cannot simply wave a cheerleading flag for the Thunder Bay Police and that be acceptable to leadership such as Grand Chief Fiddler and Deputy Grand Chief Achni Penescum and the Chief of Niskandiga, Chief Munoz, and the other leadership. It's not acceptable. And it wouldn't be anywhere else in this country. If any one of our family members were caught up in this cold case pileup, we would scream to the hilltops to demand justice. Why are Indigenous people put through this?
It's been 10 years this year since I moved from Thunder Bay, and some of these cases date back way before that. The call for reinvestigations, nothing new for the police service. By my count, they're the original 9 mentioned in Broken Trust, the landmark report you mentioned there by the OIPRD. 14 in another report that APTN News obtained. Now calls for 3 more. When do you expect we'll hear any news about any of these?
Well, that's what makes me sad, right? What I think they're counting on, whether it's the Thunder Bay Police or now the Solicitor General, who's instead of saying, you know, okay, you filed complaints with the Inspector of Policing, let's see what the inspector had to say. That's not what Minister Kersner said in the House. Minister Kersner said in the House that we should trust the Thunder Bay Police and give them a chance. So he's become, a cheerleader for them. That means that he expects these families to line up behind the other 20 families that are all waiting for outcomes. They have something called Project Cedar now. Please, and that involves some 10 to 13 deaths. Please understand, all this is really code for is that Indigenous lives are less worthy than everybody else's lives. And so therefore it's okay if a family loses a family member for them to wait idly by for years and years to get an outcome of a death investigation. Better that than face the truth that the Thunder Bay Police Service is incapable of delivering as a police service. And understand why it's happening. And I apologize for the speeches, and I'm sorry about that, to talk so much, but it's outrageous. What's really happening is those in power in Thunder Bay, in other words, the City Council, those in charge of local power in Thunder Bay, actually approve of the job the Thunder Bay Police are doing. That's why they're still in place. That's why it's okay. They approve of the fact that Thunder Bay is hostile to Indigenous people, that the environment is one in which Indigenous people cannot trust authority figures. They're good with that. And that's never going to change. And it hasn't in 10, 20 years. And the truth of the matter is the only way to create a change is disband the Thunder Bay Police Service, put in something like the OPP. They're far from perfect, but they're answerable outside of the borders of Thunder Bay. And that's what you need, because it's clear, it's crystal clear, that as long as you have a police service only answerable to the power elite in Thunder Bay, you will never get a change. You will have a police service that's responsive to white needs, but it is not responsive to Indigenous needs.
The other thing I was going to mention about that report that I'd spoken about was also mentioned the need to reinvestigate, or that there's 25 at least unsolved cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women sitting with the Thunder Bay Police as well. And this is a police service that loves to talk about clearance rates on homicides. Julian, more to talk about here anyways. We do have to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Stick around.
APTN presents a captivating journey into the heart of the North with our latest podcast, The Place That Thaws.
Some areas that used to be safe are no longer safe.
Hosted by me, Danielle Parody. Join us as we uncover the intricacies of life on a changing coast. Subscribe and listen to The Place That Thaws.
Welcome back to Face to Face. This week we're sitting down with Julian Falconer, a lawyer recognized as one of Canada's top human rights lawyers, and we've been talking about the Thunder Bay Police Service and the calls for the disbandment of that service and the reinvestigation of dozens of deaths. Julian, many of your cases over the years have involved alleged wrongdoing by police or governments. You kind of touched on it there, but would replacing the Thunder Bay Police Service make much of a difference than what they currently have?
Yeah, and the first thing you have to ask yourself is, what at core is the problem? If you're going to actually work to remedying it, you have to ask that fundamental question: what is the core problem? And the core problem, I've come to the conclusion, and I get it, I could be wrong, I'm just one human, but the core problem, as far as I'm concerned, is that the Thunder Bay Police are exactly what the municipal leads in Thunder Bay want. In other words, Sylvia Hoth was delivering precisely the product they want. And it will continue to be the case that the Thunder Bay Police Service, in its racist delivery of policing, is exactly what the elite who lead the municipality, those in power, want. And because it's what they want, right? Nobody would say it that way. And there are, by the way, because I've had an office in Thunder Bay since 2008, I want to be crystal clear. I have friends in Thunder Bay who are non-Indigenous, people who are good people who are great partners for Indigenous people. But unfortunately, they don't run the city. Those who run the city, straight up, have never insisted and have never provided a police service that was supportive or safe for Indigenous people, and that's the problem. So the first thing you need to do is identify, how do you take the police service out of the sole control of the municipality, and create a police service that's accountable beyond the borders of Thunder Bay. And so that's why I bring up the OPP.
Some of those former police go on to become mayors. As we mentioned in the intro, you were involved in the inquest into the deaths of 7 youth in Thunder Bay, representing Anishinaabe-Aski Nation. What were your hopes and Nan's hopes for that inquest? Do you think that those hopes for yourselves, the families, were met?
Those hopes are absolutely dashed. I want to be clear. I feel like an utter failure. So I understand that good people are working on implementation of the inquest recommendations. There's 745. But that's all you could describe it as, a continued work in progress. The system has essentially, in my view, seized up like a bad engine. And why? The system's seized up because, neither the will financially of any level of government to actually get these recommendations across the finish line is there. Discussions continue. I know NAN's made real efforts. I've been part of some of those negotiations. Real efforts to try and sort out the question of how do we put in place a deliverable that actually implements all the recommendations. That's the first question. But at its heart, you will keep running into the same problems. Let me give you an example. At the time that the 7 Youth Inquest was going on, and evidence was being heard in a courtroom in Thunder Bay, I was examining one of the police officers on how it was he could have been involved in issuing a press release saying no foul play was suspected in one of the deaths of one of the youths, when no autopsy had been performed, when none of the most basic steps for a death investigation had even been done yet, but they'd already dubbed it an accident or a non-homicide, all right? And this is a familiar story to you. I know that you know this, that this is what they're known for. Well, I'm in the middle of examining the officer, and by the next morning, in 2015, Stacey DeBungy passes, and his body is found by the McIntyre. And what comes out while the officer's on the stand is another press release declaring that death was non-suspicious. In other words, they did it again while the inquest was going on, and the officer in charge of that scene, didn't seize any exhibits, no photos of the scene, no interviews of witnesses, and that officer, by the name of Harrison, he finally goes to a police discipline hearing, not last year, all right? Goes to a police discipline hearing and gets found guilty. That is, he's found liable. It's the first one I know of. I've practiced for some 34 years, and I'm telling you, it's the first time I've heard of this. He was found guilty of discreditable conduct for doing a racist homicide investigation. Okay, so you would say that's a real breakthrough for accountability. I'm not happy that was the finding, but that was the finding of an adjudicator, all right? Mm-hmm. He files an appeal. He was ultimately unsuccessful on his appeal. But do you know what happened after the finding of guilt against Harrison? Well, the police chief approved declaring Harrison some months later as Employee of the Month for the Thunder Bay Police Service. I mean, it's inconceivable that any chief of police would not see the insult to Indigenous people of doing that in the wake of the discreditable conduct finding. And so this circularity, the feeling of Groundhog Day in Thunder Bay is inevitable. So I don't say these things to create controversy or to personally insult anybody. I say these things because, as far as I'm concerned, we keep experiencing the same thing, and around we go. And so it's important to keep calling them out and demanding real steps. And now we've reached the stage where disbandment is a no-brainer. Because I ask this question: what do you keep telling Indigenous people when they lose a loved one? Do you say what Minister Kersner says to them? Don't worry, trust them. I mean, is that an honest, respectful sentiment to convey in the context of a service that repeatedly has failed the way they have? When do we just look this thing right in the eye and say it's not worth the experiment and we need something different? And why are Indigenous people constantly at the back of the line for credible death investigations? It just makes no sense.
Julian, we're going to step aside from the topic of Thunder Bay here in a few minutes. We just got to step aside for one more quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with lawyer Julian Falconer. Stick around.
I'm Kathleen Martins, a reporter with APTN News. Homeless, houseless, shelterless people, they aren't hard to find in Winnipeg. They're on the sidewalks, in bus shelters, and down alleyways. They're living in tents and squatting in empty buildings. They're even sleeping in abandoned cars. But who are they? hear their stories in my new 5-part podcast called Our Relatives. Listen on your favorite player.
At the end of the day, there was a finding that I think that Mike Harris will have to live with for his entire life, which is that he specifically made the statement, "I want the effing Indians out of the park," that the statement was racist, that he misled the House as Premier at the time, along with the Attorney General. These are very damning findings.
Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Julian Falconer, who you just saw there in a clip from a show we did called Contact. That was from November 14th, 2007. Julian, any reflections on all of that?
How'd my hair get so damn white? I can't emphasize enough how much of an honor it was to be there, to be permitted to act for Indigenous people at that inquiry. The shooting death of Dudley George was a needless, senseless act caused by a premier who was unable to keep his nose out of police operations and pushed an OPP to do something nutty. And someone died as a result. Good people have come to their senses about how important it is to keep a very strong barrier between political and policing. And so I think we're probably a stronger province for that. You know, I've been involved in directly holding Premier Ford accountable when he tried to appoint a commissioner of the OPP who had, from the perspective of many of us, way too close a relationship to the Premier, and in my view, good sense prevailed, and that didn't happen. But you know, there's a deputy commissioner who did the right thing who's still suffering as a result, and that's Brad Blair, who stood up and said this Taverner appointment is wrong. When you look at how things evolve, it can be in the policing world or the non-policing world. It can be for Indigenous people, it can be for white folks, it can be, and I can use words like that, with a black Jamaican father and a Jewish mother who's a survivor from the Holocaust. I get to say all these words. But the bottom line is, good policing is an essential component in all aspects of the health of a society. I was in front of the Supreme Court of Canada for the Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario yesterday. Mm-hmm. I am honored to represent good policing. I'm honored when police officers trust me with their brief. And I have no doubt in my mind that there are many good officers. But when bad officers are allowed to operate unchecked, they represent just a deep threat to our sense of well-being. We trust them with the use of lethal force. We trust them to be there when things are in meltdown mode for our families, because we know that a lot of these deaths and a lot of these problems happen when we make that call to the police and we say we need help, and the wrong people show up. So in my mind, it has just as much potential to do good as bad. And you know, I'm a bit, and I mean no disrespect to anybody who has cancer, I don't mean to be insensitive, but I'm a bit like a cancer doctor. I'm kind of your bad news bear. You bring me in when there's a real problem. And honestly, I say this to you with all sincerity, the Thunder Bay Police Service are a cancer. And the only way to deal with the cancer is remove it. And everyone keeps trying with all these different, you know, tricks of the trade. We got your administrators. Well, one goes in. They appoint people who have no background in policing. They appoint people that Indigenous people don't know. Then they put in another administrator. Same thing. And same results.
Right.
And we keep doing this. And there can be only one inference to draw from it all. And that is that Indigenous lives don't matter. And I really wish, you know, I thought about this. and it wasn't for this interview or for media, I just thought about this when you get that odd, quiet moment to yourself. Why don't we just tell the truth and say we don't care? Like, why are we doing the facade anymore? Like, 20 to 30 deaths are lined up in an investigation, and they're all stalled. They call it Project Cedar. It's Project BS, because they're not moving. The cases aren't being resolved. They go back decades now. Stacey DeBungy died in 2015. His brother got told in 2021 that they were going to make it a criminal investigation. Do you think we have a result? No. So why don't we just tell the truth as a population? Why don't we just say it? We don't care. At least then it would be honest, because this has to stop. I mean, leaders like Deputy Grand Chief Achni Penescum, like Alvin Fiddler, Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler, like the leadership of the First Nations that keep going out there and doing battle. Just honor them and respect them by saying the truth to their face. We don't care.
Dour end to the show, but unfortunately we are out of time. Julian brought it full circle there. Lots of things we didn't get to talk about, like the stuff going on with the Supreme Court and First Nations policing. But do thank you for making the time for us on the show this week.
It's been an honor.
That is all the time we have for Face to Face. I'm Dennis Ward. We'll see you back here in 7 days.
APTN Investigates delivers impactful, Indigenous-focused stories that change lives and reveal the bigger picture. On this week's show,
I'm Rob Smith. In the winter of 1987, Stanley Morris Peters was killed in a hit and run. Despite a conviction, his family still searches for his body in BC's coastal mountains. Find out my episode, Lost Spirit.
APTN Investigates, Friday, immediately following APTN National News.